is now 9 o'clock. Recording has begun. I would like to call to order this meeting of the WIFA Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee, and I will call the roll.
Oh, shoot. Shoot.
And there you go.
Okay.
Patrice,
Okay.
we can hear you. There we go.
It's now 9 a.m. I would like to call to order this meeting of the WIFA Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee. Recording has started, and I will call the roll. Drew John.
Here.
Patrice Horseman. Come back to
I don't know.
Patrice.
She is online, so I think she's just having mic issues at the moment.
Pete Kim.
Here.
Tim Tomier.
Here.
Ted Cook, I'm here. Sue Montgomery will not be attending today. And Patrice?
I'm present. Sorry about that. Having computer issues here this morning.
We have 5 members present. A quorum is confirmed. For the record, please remember to identify yourselves when making a motion or requesting to speak. Please ensure that you are unmuted for any votes. And for those in the room, please remember to leave the microphones on the table for sound quality purposes. In addition, if any member wishes to depart the meeting at any time, please announce your departure for our recorded meeting records. And for the record, I note that there are at least a couple of key folks who have to be done by 11, and I think that shouldn't be a problem. Moving to agenda item number 2, disclosure of conflicts of interest. Has the WIFA staff received any such disclosures?
Good morning, Joe Chatelli, General Counsel. No disclosures have been submitted for today's meeting.
Thank you. If any member would like to identify and disclose a conflict for any item on today's agenda, they may do so at this time. Seeing none, we will move on to our regular agenda. Item number 3, Director's Report. Before that, I guess I got my items mixed up here. Members of the public wishing to speak on a specific agenda item may submit a speaker's card prior to the chair opening discussion on that item. For instructions on how to submit a speaker's card, please refer to the notes on the proceedings section of today's meeting agenda. Item number 3, Director's Report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Appreciate you being able to join us on this. I wouldn't say off cycle because it's not like we have a cycle for these meetings, but this is a kind of a different meeting for us. So thanks for making the time. A couple of updates I want to give the committee before we jump into the content of today. The first is a very exciting one regarding board appointments. As you know, all of our large county representatives rotated off technically in January, but have been continuing to serve as necessary until their appointments have been made. We did hear from the governor's office a couple of weeks ago now that she has made her 2 appointments, and they are folks whose reputations precede them and need no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that is Mr. Chairman Ted Cook has been reappointed, as well as Sue Montgomery, who many of you will remember was a WIFA board member several months ago, resigned because she changed her residency to a large county, and then we got her back as a large county representative. So I will do more detailed introductions of Sue and any other board members who may be appointed by the time of the next board meeting. But I do want to say publicly just how much we appreciate Governor Hobbs and her thoughtfulness in making these appointments. I think everyone will agree with me that these are 2 highly qualified individuals. And though I am entirely biased about the importance of WIFA's work, these are the right kinds of people to lead that work into the future. So I am thrilled to have Ted back for another 5 years, thrilled to have Sue back, and really look forward to seeing who else will round out our team of leaders as we go forward in this process. I will give an update from the Speaker of the House when I have it in terms of who he will be appointing. And then once that is done, it is Senate Minority Leader Senator Ration's job to appoint the next one. So I'll just let you know. We're still a little bit in a holding pattern. I will note that because of the way the appointments lined out, we do currently have a vacancy on the board, which is why we only have 6 members of this committee at the moment. So hopefully those appointments will get done as quickly as we can. With that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Ben for the remainder of the director's report. Ben is going to talk a little bit about the kind of public outreach process that we're in, give us a quick update as to where we are in lay of the land on that. So I won't steal his thunder. I'll just let him jump right into it.
Thank you, Director, and congratulations, Chairman, on your reappointment. I'd like to provide an update to the committee on public engagement strategy. So What you're looking at here is our three-pronged approach to engaging off-takers, stakeholders, pertinent agencies, and the general public during our due diligence phase 2. So starting with the off-taker advisory group, we've had our 6th, I believe, off-taker advisory group meeting. We have 16 participants, again, with the goal of providing WIFA advice and guidance on the governance structure of proposed projects, their steering committees, et cetera, as well as feedback on feasibility analysis that's generated from task orders. Our regulatory advisory group, and that includes key state agencies and executive offices with regulatory, land, risk, policy oversight responsibilities. So think of entities like DWR, DEQ, Land Department, Risk Management, Game and Fish, on the governor's office. So this group again helps us identify permitting pathways, compliance considerations, interagency coordination. So we anticipate convening this group when we hit certain milestones in the task order process, and they provide valuable feedback. And in speaking with some of these agencies, they're happy to engage early in the process. And then lastly, rounding out these 3 advisory groups is our community engagement advisory group. Arguably one of the most important. It brings together representative interests from across Arizona, including municipal water provider associations, environmental organizations, NGOs, home builders and development interest, ag stakeholders, tribal representatives, the Arizona-Mexico Commission, regional chambers. So it really provides a structured forum to surface community level concerns, test messaging, incorporate public perspective into phase 2 decision making. So we're convening our inaugural meeting of this advisory group this month. And following that initial meeting, this group will serve kind of as our main sounding board for engaging public going forward. And there'll be opportunities for public comment and feedback at subsequent meetings of that advisory group. So together, these 3 advisory groups provide us with a structured, transparent mechanism to test assumptions, incorporate expert and community perspectives, and ensure the board decisions are informed by meaningful stakeholder input. So the 3 advisory groups that I just went over are very Arizona-centric stakeholders and potential off-takers. Our engagement approach deliberately distinguished between in-state community engagement and out-of-state regional partner engagement. And as we noted in January to this committee, WIFA retains responsibility for cross-jurisdictional relationships, stakeholder and public engagement, oversight, approval of engagement strategies and materials, and direct engagement with the board with respect to our development teams. We have also engaged outside consultants to support certain stakeholder coordination and engagement activities at WIFA's direction. Think of them as, I like to refer them as Sherpas when we're talking with other states and other prospective regional partners. The development teams are responsible for leading project-specific engagement efforts within the parameters of their task orders and representing their individual projects. And we anticipate additional refinement occurring as task order scoping evolves and we continue to work together in partnership. So on that note, working together in partnership, we're in the process of setting up meetings with prospective indispensable regional partners, high-level jurisdictional authorities. So think of entities like the Bureau of Reclamation, entities in California, and Mexico over the next month. And the purpose of these meetings are threefold. So they're establishing a rapport among the several parties. They're framing WIFA as the lead agency, and they set expectations for phase 2 interactions. So most importantly, how these entities want WIFA and our development teams to engage with them going forward. So again, this is just the opening touch point for these appraisal level studies, and we anticipate that additional entities will need to be engaged as the development teams get deeper into fulfilling task orders. And then lastly, I'll reiterate that establishing WIFA as the facilitator, the convener, and the lead agency has not only been the expectation of WIFA and our board, but also of the offtake advisory group members, as well as many of the entities that we will be engaging. So we're excited to begin these conversations. We'll be reporting back to the board, of course, and looking forward to moving forward. I'll hand it back to you, Director.
Thanks, Ben. I want to underscore a couple of things from both of these slides that Ben said, because I think they're really important to highlight and put kind of a neon sign around. Regarding the slide that's up right now, WIFA is here to play a very specific and very unique, I would say, role in this process, right? We are here as a government actor. And along this process, we have explained that WIFA's role as a government actor and as a state entity can be really valuable, especially in government to government discussions. There are some things that need to happen on a government to government level. Of course, we have these development teams, and we are very excited, and we chose them largely because of their ability to go out and do some of this diplomatic and community building work. But there are still going to be certain things that need to be WIFA's role and need to be WIFA's responsibility. I don't want anyone to have the impression that we are delegating the responsibilities that should be ours. And I think what Ben just lined out actually showed exactly how we are maintaining responsibility that should be our responsibility, ensuring that there are conversations that happen on a government to government level so that we can respect the sensitivities around those conversations, the political implications around those conversations. We are very much going to be in control of those. And then where it is appropriate, and I think the easiest way to think of where it's appropriate is when it is WIP specific or project specific engagement. That's what we have the teams for. And they're going to be fantastic at that. And they're going to go out and do that very, very well and ensure that we are building the support and building the rapport that we need to make these projects and make this process successful. Going back to the slide before, we've made some really big promises to the public about their ability to engage in this process going forward. The solicitation was something very difficult for the public to engage in because of the nature of how a solicitation works. But the way we structured this process was that we were going to end that solicitation, move into contract work, and allow it to be something that is 100% transparent, something that the public gets to participate in a meaningful way. This is exactly how this is going to happen. And I want to underscore that, especially with that community engagement group, because while we are still going to welcome the public to come in and give their 3-minute, 2-minute comments at the end of a public meeting and ensure that the board, hears what they have to say, we want to make sure that we can actually do something with that information. And I think there's going to be a lot of it. I hope there's going to be a lot of public engagement on this process because it's really important. And these are generational projects that are going to provide an incredibly critical resource for Arizona going forward. So I don't want comments and public input to get lost in the shuffle. I want it to be something that a group of community engaged people can take that information, distill it, make it digestible for you as the board, and then you can actually do something with it as you make decisions about these projects going forward. So this is not at all meant to be sort of a delegation of the board's interaction with the public. This is actually meant to enhance your interaction with the public because you can take all of the information, it can be distilled, it can be summarized, it can be kind of made into this more usable format by experts in the field and folks who are very much have a vested interest in these projects. And then you can take that as the board and know what to do with it and know how it should influence your decisions. So that's just kind of what I wanted to highlight about that process and why we've set it up the way that we have. And happy to answer any questions about this or anything else that's been in the director's report.
Are there any questions before we move on? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to agenda item number 4, task order template review and discussions. And before we get started on that, my understanding is that we do not at this moment have any speakers cards have been submitted on any of these 5 sub items on agenda item number 4. But if we receive them, I'll be alerted to that and we can take them as they are relevant to particular task orders along the way. We won't have to wait till the end necessarily because we might miss something to the conversation we just had. We might miss something important if we wait to the end. So before we get started on that, though, I wanted to congratulate the staff and HDR and other consultants who may have been involved on the outstanding job that they did in putting together the material for this topic. Every step that we take in this process has been very, very important as far as the need for thoughtfulness and consistency and completeness. And this effort has been no deviation from that general rule that we followed so far. A lot of hard work in a relatively short period of time. I went through the 76 pages, of course, preparing for this meeting, or however long it was, but it was about on that order. And it was hierarchical in nature. That started at a summary level and then peeled the onion down to more and more detailed levels of information. And I found myself with quite a number of questions as I was marching down from the top of the pyramid. But the good news is that, from speaking for myself, that I found all of those questions were answered in some way. So in the detail of the material, and particularly as we moved from task orders 0 through task orders 1 through 4, the presentation was consistent. So what to expect after going through the first couple of them, I knew what to expect reading the other 3, and where to look for particular things, and so on and so forth. So it was very helpful. So really the only comments that I had to make back to Director McGuire was specific things that concerned me, as far as, can we shine a brighter light on these details that appear subsequently in the more detailed sections of the document, so that they show up in the summary in some way, things like that. So it was an enjoyable experience compared to what my initial reaction was to seeing a 76-page document that I had to go through. It was not as tedious or as troublesome as one might think looking at something like that. So again, thank you very much for all the hard work and the thoughtful work. So with that introduction, I'd like to turn it back over to Director McGuire to begin taking us through our 5 task orders.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think the fact that you found that an enjoyable process is exactly why you were reappointed to this board. So thank you for that. All right, before we dig into the substance of the task orders, I know that we as staff marinate in this a lot, and we sort of live and breathe this structure and this language. And so I just want to make sure before we go into it that the committee is on the same page as we are, because sometimes that doesn't always happen. We don't expect you to read our minds. And so if this feels repetitive, it's because it is. But we are just trying to help make sure that everybody is sort of coming at this from the same perspective. So again, you've seen this slide before, but going back to the structure of our contractual relationship with our development teams. We have the base contract. Everything stems from this, right? This was the contract that was contained within the solicitation, and it is the governance kind of from a high level holistic approach of our relationship with the development teams. So this is things like timing and when you submit and how you invoice and other things like that. This is the rules that govern our relationship. Contained within the base contract is what you all approved, I forget what month this was now, probably February, task 0, which is intended to do a couple things. The first is that it created a mechanism for us to both compensate and cost control the work that the teams are doing to scope the tasks that we're talking about today. And it's also a tool that we're going to be able to use to direct teams to do kind of programmatic work through the process. If it doesn't fit squarely into any of the subject specific tasks, but it's still critical, we sort of have a bucket to put that in, right? Then we have the subject specific tasks, tasks 1 through 5. These are the buckets that the teams will have to develop the information that you're all going to use to make decisions regarding WIFA and the state of Arizona's future investment in these projects. I'm not going to dig deep into that because that's what we're going to do here, but I just wanted everyone to remember and kind of understand the relationship between everything that we're talking about. So on the next slide is the task order approval process. Again, something that you are familiar with, something that you have seen before. There are 2 elements to these task orders that WIFA's leadership needs to approve. The first is the scope of work. That's what you have in front of you today. So roughly, not exactly, but roughly think of this as a fill in the blank outline. We're going to go into a lot more detail about them, like I said, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but these outlines will ultimately be approved by the committee. Not today. We're going to give you multiple opportunities to review and to comment on these outlines before we ask you to approve them. But that is going to be your role as the committee. Approve the high-level guidance for these teams to say, now go out and tell us exactly what you're going to tell us. And that's what gets to the second part of these task orders, which is the form of task order itself. That's the outlines with all of the blanks filled in, and it's the teams that are going to fill in those blanks. So that's why it's really important that we get the outlines right, and that the outlines themselves actually reflect the expectations of the committee, so that once the task orders themselves get to the board, we don't come to a point of saying, well, wait, we missed this critical element, or this is not the level of detail we were looking for, or this is just completely off the mark. That's why we're doing this in a progressive manner. We want to make sure you have input at every step of the way so that we get the right product at the end of the day. The other reason we're doing this in a progressive manner is because of the green boxes on this slide. Anytime the committee reviews these outlines, the public also has the opportunity to see these outlines and give us comments and feedback about whether they reflect their expectations. So all of this, again, is sort of our typical work that is done maybe a little bit more bulky than necessary, but bulky because that gives us the opportunity to, one, get it right, two, make sure that everyone who deserves to have input in the process has the opportunity to have that input, and three, not have to go and redo work after the fact, kind of getting it right in that way. If you'll go to the next slide too, I want to level set again expectations for level of detail, recognizing that you cannot read this slide, but I'm putting it up here because this is, again, a slide that you've seen before. Remember our phases. We've talked about our phases pretty significantly. We've talked about our phases frequently, and how we're doing this in a stair step, going up the ladder, whatever metaphor you want to use. We'll get to my terrible metaphors, even more detail here in just a minute. Phase one was our solicitation. We are done with that, thankfully. We are out of the solicitation and we are well into phase two, which we've called our sort of pay for work product phase. And within this phase is the task orders. So once those are done, that moves us out of phase two and into phase three. But the difference between the two is important. So in this phase two, what we are doing is we are asking the teams to evaluate their water augmentation projects further. Take the concepts that they gave us within phase one and give us additional details to help the WIFA board make decisions about which one of these moves to phase three, which is a project pre-development kind of phase. In phase three is when we get implementation details fleshed out. So that's permitting and financing and construction and long-term operations. That's later. Phase two is determining the phrasing that we've used several times is which of these projects are even worthy of moving into that next phase. This is important because this is going to help us standardize the way we talk about phase two and standardize the way that we're thinking about phase two by ensuring that we're setting expectations for level of detail correctly. So if you go to the next slide, one of the things that we have tried to do is make sure that we use the right language to talk about what we're doing. What phase two is not is a feasibility study, which is a term we'll kind of borrow from the way that the Bureau of Reclamation uses these terms, right? What phase two is appraisal. So appraisal is the initial planning investigation. The purpose of this is to define the problem and the need, identify the participants and the beneficiaries. We're going to formulate and compare preliminary alternatives, identify major obstacles, determine if there's sufficient interest, and at least one or more, hopefully, viable alternatives to justify moving forward with those alternatives. This work is going to be based kind of largely, maybe primarily on existing data. And so the reports are going to recommend that should the investigation conclude, does this preliminary data tell us that there is a roadblock that we're just not going to be able to get over? Or should we advance to feasibility and figure out what that feasibility phase looks like? So remember, we started this process with a totally blue sky. We had an objective of go find more water for use in Arizona, do that however you need to do it right when you get work, right? This is why the solicitation was crafted the way that it was, because we wanted the high level ideas to let us know which of these ideas we should even begin to appraise, which of these is even worth the time and the resources it's going to be necessary to get us to determining whether they're real enough, whether they're useful enough, whether they are commercially promising enough to actually enter into pre-development. Are these Arizona worthy projects? By contrast, feasibility is what gets us to implementation, right? That's phase three. closer to phase 3. I'm sure we will have a little bit of refining as we go forward with that. And so that's how WIFA decides whether to proceed toward final agreements. It's important that we note nothing is final right now. And it's important that we note that, one, to set your expectations, but also set the expectations of the communities in which these projects are located. Our goal is not to bulldoze. Our goal is to collaborate, right? We want to make sure that everybody understands that. And it's also really important for us to know what level of detail do we need in these task orders to get us to appraisal versus feasibility. So, question to ask today: will these task order outlines, as they are structured, give you as WIFA's leadership what you need, what you expect, and you want for appraisal? The terrible metaphor that I am using is a map versus a route, right? When you open up a map, you can see a bunch of different destinations on the map. And if I say, you know, I want to go away in Arizona for the weekend, I can see the cities on the map. That's kind of appraisal. Which of these cities is even in Arizona? Which of these cities are even possible for me to go to within the, time frame that I have? But the route's going to tell me, how long is it going to take to get there? What's the weather going to be like when I get there? Is there traffic? Is there construction? All of that is much more detailed than just saying which of these is even worth me looking for an Airbnb or figuring out what the route's going to be. So I've said all of that. Jason, any of the HDR team, add to help clarify what I've just said. And of course, committee members, questions that you have or clarification we can offer so that we're all sort of on the same page before we dig into the substance.
I think that was generally pretty
Is your
consistent.
mic on, Jonathan? Perfect.
Yeah, I think that was generally pretty consistent with the vision for these different appraisal studies and what's going to follow after that in phase 3 of the whole program.
Committee members, questions that you might have.
Okay, maybe we'll have some as we
Yep.
go through the material. Thanks.
All right. So I think, does that lead us on to 4A, I believe?
4A, yes. Task order 0.
Okay. As we talked about, task order 0, 4A is sort of our high level relationship, or task order 0 is our administrative, how we manage the projects. We do have a supplement proposed in these outlines to task order 0. And that supplement is actually, again, to help with the expectations of the board and the expectations of the public in terms of when we can expect information to be given from the teams. So I'm actually going to turn it over, I think, first to Jonathan, if you want to start with this kind of staging framework, and then we can fill in from there. So if you can go to the next slide, Ben.
Okay, so the WIPA appraisal studies are broken down into 3 stages that are intended to guide the developers in delivering at various stages so that we have some alignment on what their contractual obligations are and that they're in general achieving the progress and meeting expectations. So in general, we're breaking them down in part to gradually get to a greater level of detail and understanding on what the risks are. Things like security of the water supplies, reliability, et cetera, all of the things that are important to the long-term water augmentation fund program. So in general, the appraisal stages in terms of the reporting all fall within the task 0 supplement, which provides the details and guidance on what the reports are supposed to include, what they need to address, the suggested goals, et cetera. So here's a detailed breakdown in general of what these different 3 stages are going to look like. So stage 1 is initial concept development. So the estimate for all of the teams is that they're going to take about 6 to 9 months to complete studies at this level. So the general expectation that we have of the developers is that they're going to develop their initial concept from what was in their proposal with the goal of developing it into something that's suitable for external engagement and substantive feedback, once they make it past stage 1. So in general, what we're looking for is desktop level engineering and environmental research. So that's mainly just going to be reporting, no field investigations. major vulnerabilities regarding social and community impact. If there are any major value engineering or concept review opportunities at that time, and then rough order of magnitude cost estimation. Detailed evaluations would follow after that if the developers are permitted to proceed to that level. And that's going to involve more technical evaluations, engineering, potentially any field investigation if it's appropriate or permitted by WIFA, and then an update of the cost estimates. And then finally, stage 3 would be taken to an approximately 15% design level, and that's consistent with a feasibility level degree of definition. Appraisal.
Okay, so going back, if you can go back one slide, Ben, appreciate that explanation, Jonathan. And what I think the easiest way for me to think about this, and again, we have phases, now we have stages. It's kind of confusing. But the way that I wanted to think, or want you to think about this staging framework, is that the task orders themselves are not serial. We're going to be doing work in all 5 task orders at the same time as it makes sense. We want the work of the task orders to inform the rest of the work, right? All of that's kind of this big integrated process. The stages are serial. And after each stage, we will have sort of a standardized expectation of what kind of information the board can expect at the end of each phase and how that information will be reported to the board. That was very important, I think, for us as staff to give a certain level of predictability, to give a level of cadence. But also, I think, because as the board, you're going to have to make decisions about what you want to do with each of these projects. And if you have one project that's reporting very differently than another, and you don't have at least as apples to apples comparison as we can possibly get with projects that are very, very different from each other, I don't know how to help guide you to make that decision. And so that's really the goal of this staging framework, is to give you some consistency and predictability, and to understand that we will have similar information from projects to look at the same time. And that helps you understand how to actually treat the information that you get. I also think it streamlines a little bit the project appraisal and allows you to have those regular intervals for input and decision making. We don't want the work of the teams to happen in a vacuum. We want that work to be done with sort of feedback along the way, because if they're going in the wrong direction, let's course correct that. These stages give us the opportunity to do that course correction, again, kind of predictably and at certain levels that we can actually give to you. These reports are going to be received by you all as they are complete. So there's timelines and they're heavily suggested, but this gives us the ability to do the work as we go along and not get to a stage and realize that we are completely off base of what the committee or the board was asking us to do. So with that, I think, Mr. Chairman, you had a few questions, and happy to entertain those.
Actually, I just have I think at this point, a comment, maybe to help some folks understand, as committee members and maybe members of the public a little bit, that these stages, these 3 stages, are arranged around, designed around, I hate to use that word design, but designed around industry standard conceptual framework. And you'll see references even at this very high level summary here, and I'll leave it to HDR to go into more detail if it's appropriate, about things like, particularly stage 3, 15% design level. So design level is a standard industry usage for, we're at this stage in our process, and you'll see references to class 5 and class 4 estimates, and those 2 are industry standard definitions that give some meaning to what range of certainty do you have about particularly a financial estimate, relative order of magnitude type numbers and things like that, so that we can have a consistency along the process so that people understand the nature of the information that we're receiving, and then it's consistent from project to project as well, so that as everything is going on, not in series, the staging is in series, but the projects will all be worked in parallel, that we're not just getting a mishmash of whatever it is that the team decides is appropriate. It has to fit into this definition of information that's being provided. So I don't know if Jason, you or your team wants to expand on that at all.
No, I think that's accurate.
The expansion I might add to that, Chairman, is that these provide clear checkpoints for when the committee and board could expect to see definition from the development teams as well. So we don't go through the entire process and then end up with something at the end and say, this was a good idea, this wasn't a good idea. It provides a defined set of checkpoints along the way for the committee and board. I think that's the overarching goal. I see Mr. Phillips has brought himself off mute as well.
Yes, thank you. Yep, no, thanks. I just wanted to add, Mr. Chairman, that everything I heard from Director McGuire and yourself and Jonathan was spot on. These industry standards and recommendations for what each stage will have in the reports are strong recommendations from the WIFA and HDR team to the developers. But just like the months are a little bit of a range for each stage, so some of the projects, it may make more sense to have more detail and less detail than other projects. And we're leaving that up to the developers to initially propose what will make the most sense. And so that as we negotiate these tasks, we'll work with them on that. But I think, you have the idea correct here that this gives them a sense of the level of detail we're looking for so that this committee and the board can start to get a good sense as to whether these projects are heading in a direction that will be worth pursuing into the next phase.
Thank you. If there are no other comments or questions at this point, I believe we're moving now from agenda item 4A to 4B and going back to Director McGuire.
Thank you very much. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over largely to the HDR team. I realize I was remiss in asking you all to introduce yourselves, so I think I'll have you do that. You can either do it as you're coming online to talk about the outlines themselves, or you can do it all now. I'll leave that up to you. But at this point, I will turn it over to our subject matter experts. So take it away.
Yes, so thank you, Director McGuire. So I'm Jonathan Noga, a project manager at HDR, and just responsible for developing the scope for task order 1. So in summary, what the technical evaluations outline is intended to do is set out what are the key technical priorities and considerations that we want each of the developer teams to expand on in developing their scope of work for their projects. It's not we're not necessarily dictating exactly what that scope is, but we are indicating what the priorities are, especially as they relate to what the goals are for the long-term water augmentation fund. The key feature of the task order 1 scope, and for all the task orders in general, is that there is an expectation that they take ownership in developing their scope of work. These projects are in large part their vision that they're proposing. So what we're providing to them are the priorities, and the intent is that they interpret what those priorities are for their projects. Okay, next slide. So here's just a summary of what those priorities and what the key submittals are. So at the top of the list would be things like technology, reliability, water security would be a really important one. Land and power requirements, hydraulic functionality. That's really important just to ensure that the water can actually get from A to B, since we're at a conceptual level. Things like water quality, making sure that whatever water is going to be delivered meets the requirements of wherever it needs to go. Environmental impacts of the whole project, any infrastructure requirements, whether existing or new. Of course, water volumes, and if there are any requirements for off-takers to accept water from the project. The key submittals under task order 1 would be a preliminary engineering report. And the vision for that is that would be effectively a compendium of all the studies from the developers. This would be submitted in each stage, 1, 2, 3, and would evolve, as well as an implementation phasing plan to include details on how the project would be built out, timing of water deliveries. And then beyond all that would be the developer's scope of studies that would be unique to their project. Yeah, so that's essentially it.
Okay, are there any questions from the committee members on this summary of task order 1 and the key priorities and submittals? And then, of course, this would be, this information would be developed over the 3 stages that we
Correct.
discussed
Yes.
earlier. So multiple rounds of reports and evaluations and
Correct.
meetings and so forth during that period of time, during those periods of time. Okay. Then let's move on to the next topic, please.
Good morning. My name is Michael Mayer. I'm a principal environmental project manager with HDR, and I'm overseeing the task order 2 environmental and cultural evaluations, as well as task order 3 and regulatory evaluations. So in terms of task order 2, it's really meant to identify the environmental and cultural studies that are going to be necessary to support the permitting or approvals for the construction and operation of a WIP. It's going to require developers to really plan out how they're going to work with government entities to collect that data and seek those approvals. There's a fair amount of overlap, or I guess sequencing between task orders 2 and 3, and we'll talk about that in a second. It also requires an understanding of any schedule constraints for completing the evaluations necessary to fulfill requirements. So in terms of surveys and timing for surveys and those types of things. Next slide. In terms of key priorities for this appraisal stage is environmental and cultural resource identification. So understanding what environmental and cultural resources may be there at the sites, understanding existing resource data and initial evaluation, understanding agency and government entity coordination, and then the timing for collecting and analyzing necessary data. The key submittals out of this are resource evaluation study plan, really how you're going to move to the next phase and feasibility in terms of evaluating those resources. Resource baseline report and data gap analysis. So really identifying what data is available and what data you may need to collect in the next stage. And then an impact assessment and monitoring plan. So how you would go about analyzing those impacts and what type of monitoring you'd seek to do. And so those are the key submittals. And the intention, as we mentioned before, is that these will get refined between the different stages in the appraisal stage and stage of phase, excuse me, so that as more information is developed under feasibility under task 1 and project description, these get more refined throughout stage 3.
Okay, do we have any clarifying questions from committee members? Okay, let's keep going, please, then with task order 3.
Yep. So task order 3 is regulatory evaluations. Here, the developer will need to identify the necessary environmental regulatory requirements for implementing and implementation and operation of a proposed WIP. They also need to identify the risks associated with obtaining those regulatory approvals and ways to mitigate those risks to avoid issues or delays. Part of this is also this task order is kind of divided in half in terms of environmental regulatory requirements and then other non-environmental regulatory requirements. So things like agreements and those types of things that may apply to the construction and operation of the WIP. And they'll also need to identify the risks associated with seeking those non-environmental regulatory requirements. So those agreements or other approvals and develop mitigations for those risks as well. Next slide. In terms of the key priorities for this task order is really understanding that environmental and non-environmental regulatory approval requirements and process, identifying the risks and mitigation measures associated with both of those processes, the regulatory and non-regulatory, and then looking at monitoring programs and adaptive management frameworks to allow for permits and approvals with limited data uncertainty or in cases of uncertainty. The key submittals here are a regulatory jurisdiction map, so really understanding all the entities that have jurisdiction in the project area. For the WIP, a comprehensive regulatory framework review report, a regulatory risk assessment and mitigation plan. So those really provide that framework and that path forward, as we talked about the map earlier in terms of how to get through regulatory requirements. Pre-application agency outreach, and this is really not pre-application as pre-application is sometimes defined in regulations, but even before that, that really initial outreach with agencies to seek some informal discussions. Water rights acquisition assessment, and then the regulatory framework review report.
Okay, committee members, any questions or comments about task order 3? All right, then please let's move on with task order 4.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christy Ross. I'm the communications lead supporting Ben on this project. Task order 4, although it is task order 4, I want to also reiterate that this is something that is happening in parallel with all other task orders, and actually technically starting within task order 0. So task order 4 is really starting with establishing those relationships, identifying some of these critical stakeholders who are impacted by any of these projects and also interested in this program overall. So we're working on establishing protocols and strategies for engaging these stakeholders, really focusing on building partnerships and collaborative relationships with these stakeholders, and then kind of completing on top of that an initial study to identify social, political, and community impacts and risks. So this is really going to be driven through key stakeholder engagement. It will also be driven through our engagement through our advisory groups, and then some mix of community engagement as necessary in this process. And so those things will really drive what comes out of that impact and risk assessment. Next slide. So key priorities, as I mentioned, for task order 4 is really identifying who these stakeholders are. It's important that we develop plans and begin to implement those plans, but also understanding that communications can be very fluid. And so it's important that we monitor and adapt these plans as this program progresses and as projects progress. We'll be working on establishing partnerships and relationships. I want to also reiterate that WIFA is really taking the lead, and this has been very clear in task order 4 that WIFA is the lead contact for key stakeholders, critical agencies and entities, government agencies, and tribal communications. It's important as the kind of program owner of all of this that WIFA takes that lead and really owns that process, but that will be in collaboration with the development teams, and they will be part of this process and supporting it overall. And then the developers are required to really facilitate any research or studies to help develop that social, political, and community impact and risk assessment. Developers will be submitting rules and responsibilities. Again, this task order is really a mix between development teams and WIFA. I think it's probably the most mixed of responsibilities for WIFA and development teams. And so identifying their role versus developer role early is going to be really critical. They'll also develop engagement plans for each of their projects. They'll begin to develop baseline assessment reports to start looking at demographics of these areas, socioeconomic details. This will also be heavily aligned with activities that are going to occur in task order 2 in some of the cultural evaluations that they're doing. They will have consistent summary reports of engagement activities. Again, it's important that we monitor and adapt these activities along each step of the way. And so having those engagement summaries consistently coming back to us and reporting on those activities will help us drive that process. And then ultimately out of this, we want to see a social and political risk assessment and then that social and community impact assessment to really help the board understand where concerns are from a social standpoint, political standpoint, and what those impacts might look like as these projects may progress.
Thank you. Committee members, any questions or comments on key priorities and submittals that will be associated with task order number 4? And again, reiterating that in each stage, all of the task orders will be worked on in parallel by combinations of the WIFA staff, the project consultants, and the development teams. And then if, in case anyone is wondering, task order 5. So we have a meeting scheduled for next week to have another look at task orders 1 through 4 actually, and task order 5, which is the financial task order.
That's right. And I appreciate you bringing that up, Mr. Chairman. So task order 5, as you said, is the financial task order. I believe we reported at the last meeting that WIFA had engaged financial advisors through Ernst & Young. We are still finalizing our engagement with them and want them to play an active role in helping us evaluate and helping us create the outline for task order 5. So we do plan to have that task order ready for you at the next long-term water augmentation committee meeting. We will keep you updated on that as we know whether that is realistic. I think it should be, but we'll keep you posted and we'll keep going with that on kind of parallel tracks. The other thing that I want to note as well, and of course, this is a lot of information, and so I'm not at all surprised that the committee has been relatively quiet in sort of as we've gone through the details of these task orders. That's part of the reason we're having an interim meeting, is to let you hear kind of what this means and then make sure that you can go back with that additional context and look at the outlines. We've also shared the exact same outlines that you received with the development teams themselves. So we do have some high-level comments from the development team that we will likely be incorporating into the outlines in some way, shape, or form that'll just modify them in the interim. So that's why instead of kind of giving you this and then saying, okay, come back next time and let's approve them, wanted to give you a chance to digest them better. Give us questions as you realize more about them or as you kind of understand more what these are meant to do. So that's why we're having the staggered committee meetings and multiple options for that. I also do want to note for our folks who are online in the public, you can expect that board materials will be posted for all board and committee meetings at least 2 days before the meetings themselves. We had some oversight, which I take full responsibility for, that the full board book didn't get posted for this meeting. It is posted now, so I believe that the link to that has been shared in the chat. So when we talk about these 76 or however many pages there are, they're all available to you online in the public. This is not something that's meant to be behind any sort of firewall. This is something that we want you all to be able to look at as well. So again, that's why we're having some interim meetings so that you can look at this, digest this, and then give us comments that can meaningfully impact the way that these outlines are structured. So with that, I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if you had some kind of overarching comments or questions that you wanted to share, just so that we can make sure to structure these appropriately. But now would be a great time to just ask general questions or give us general feedback about how these outlines are structured and what they look like.
Well, sure. I can make a couple of summary level comments. As I mentioned earlier, as I was going through the material, and thank you for posting that and correcting that oversight to not have the committee book published in advance of the meeting for people to look at, because these summary slides, even though they're very important and they're kind of the go-to summary of what each task order is about, what, as it says on the slides, are the key priorities that will be addressed and the key submittals. That 76-page document is very helpful with many of the details behind that. There's even a Gantt chart in there so that people whose brains don't work like that, by looking at that first slide that says this is 6 to 9 months and this is 9 to 12, and this next one, stage 3, is also 9 to 12 months. And well, where does that put that? Is that in 2028, or 2030. Well, there's a picture in there. So that could be very helpful for folks to look at side by side with these slides that we've reviewed this morning that are very high summary level. As I mentioned in my introductory comments, the information is hierarchical, and so it starts out at these high levels like this, but then it dives deeper into, on a task order level, has an illustration included in there as to what we anticipate that the information that is provided back from the developer teams will look like when it comes back to us, so that they kind of know what we're looking for. And the words that are in the boxes are examples, but it is an example for folks to know. And on the developer team, are we giving you information in the format that's going to make sense to you? And then there are detailed requirements and priorities. There are certain mandatory reports and meetings that are required. That includes everything from how risk assessments are done, dives into each of the key priorities that you see on these slides that we presented today, in greater detail about expectations of how that is done, what types, in some cases, what agencies need to be included in the conversations that are happening, and so on and so forth. So I would invite everyone, and I'm sorry that you haven't had a chance to do it until right now, but everyone who's interested in this process to take a look at all of that, and you'll have a much better understanding about all of this. So the information that was presented today is extremely important, but it is a very summary level, and if you want to dive deeper, that material is available. These 4 slides that we looked at today, or the 5 slides that we looked at today, are the summaries of all of this voluminous amount of work that has been done in preparation for today's meetings and our meeting next week, and then ultimately our presentation on this material to our board in about 2 weeks. Some of the things, and these are just by way of example, that I had mentioned earlier that I had asked if there was a way to shine a light, was my term, on some of the things that are more fully explained in the larger document. So, and this is just an example of some of the things that I identified. That I found, yes, this information is included there. This is information that developers will be receiving. It didn't get left out or forgotten. It's in there. Individual things, say, that I might be concerned about, don't necessarily discreetly show up on these key priority lists. They may be embedded in some of these things. And just as an example, I'll mention 2 or 3 of those things. I was concerned about the way that risk evaluation was done. And for each of the task orders, it said something like risk assessment and mitigation. And to me, that suggested that every identified risk would be mitigated in some way. And risk managers know that that's not always the case. There's 4 or 5 ways that risks can be addressed. You can accept it. It's the 4 T's. You can tolerate it. You can treat it, which is mitigation. You can terminate it, which means you won't take actions that will allow that risk to materialize, or you can transfer it. Someone else will take that risk on. Well, that level of detail does appear in the document, but as things get summarized, you don't see that repeated time and time again. So that's important to understand the hierarchical nature of the information that's being presented. Another one that really concerned me was in the identification of water supplies, how the rights to the water supplies would be obtained, the hydrological, I forget what the term was that you used, Jonathan, making sure that the water could get to point A to point B.
Yes, the hydraulic functionality.
Hydraulic functionality there. So I wanted to see more information about exactly that. So that, for instance, if there's a desalination plant or a surface water collection, as there are as part of these WIP projects, that how did that water that was produced in California get to a user in Arizona, with all of the discussion of which parties would be involved and what exchanges and contractual, it's in there. And it may be summarized. So you may have to, like I did, look at the key priorities and the key submittals report and say, where's this thing that I'm concerned about? And have to actually dive through the rest of the document to actually see, here's where it is, who's going to do it, when it's going to happen, those type of things. I was able to get myself comfortable with those two things specifically, and a number of other things that I was looking for as I was going through the documents. You don't always find every detail, obviously, at the summary level, and I had to dive down, but I satisfied myself that all of those things are addressed completely and thoroughly before you get to page 76. So I don't know if that monologue there shook anything loose from any of the committee members that they would like to share. I'm not seeing anything. So, which I think is actually is a good thing, because I know my committee members, and I know that them showing up today and the way that they review the information prior to the meeting so that they can have all of their questions answered and take these responsibilities that we have very seriously. So I'll just leave it at that for now. Oh, I did have one other question, because some other people, if they take my suggestion and go look at all that material, may have similar questions to mine. I mentioned earlier class 5, class 4, class 3. We don't see class 3 on there because we're not there yet. But by the time we're at the end of stage 3, we expect to have 15% design completion. We expect to have class 4 financial estimates. So we are on the cusp of, and I hope I'm using the right terminology, moving from the assessment phase to the feasibility stage. The exact definition of how does that happen, and how do we move from class 4 to class 5 level information, which will be the very next thing that happens once we move out of phase 2, is not really clear to me. And the 3-phase chart that Chelsea showed that we've had for months now looks like we're going right from phase 2 to phase 3, and we are, but phase 3 has the title development. Well, we're really not quite to development yet. Here's that slide right here. So not today, but sometime between now and when we're getting into stage 3, we have to have commonly between WIFA and the consultants and the development teams an understanding of more granularity between what we're doing in phase 2 and how we will move into phase 3. And I think I'm done. Committee members, any thoughts?
All right. Well, seeing none, I think, Mr. Chairman, that concludes everything we had for agenda item number 4. So I'll leave it to you to move on through the agenda.
Okay, have we received any speaker cards?
No request to speak.
No requests at this time. And that, I think, is somewhat understandable, since this material that for this meeting, the detailed material was just now published. Agenda number 5, a call to the public. This is for any additional public comments that don't necessarily have to be limited to the agendized task, but of course can be. And we do not have any of those either at this time. Of course, WIFA is open to accepting comments at any time, not just during the public meeting process, that if there are any comments, those can be forwarded to the WIFA staff between now and the April 9th meeting, which we'll get to in a minute, and of course during the April 9th meeting. We will endeavor to make sure that all of our materials are posted as per our usual 2-day in advance practice. Agenda item 6 is agenda development. This is the opportunity for members to identify any topics you would like to be placed on an agenda at a future meeting, understanding that we have an agendized meeting or a scheduled meeting for April 9th at 9 a.m. to go over tasks 1 through 4 again, and also include task 5 during the next meeting. Our goal will be coming out of that meeting to make recommendations to our board with respect to these task orders. anything on agenda development? Anything else? So we have spare time. We can
We
fit some other things in at those meetings.
We will do our best to fit a couple other things in. So if the committee remembers at our last meeting, we talked in depth about the next steps for the in-state long-term augmentation program. We do want to prioritize right now the work that we're doing on our importation and making sure that we get these task orders scopes developed and give them to our development teams to do the work. So while I do not make any promises, know that we are continuing to do the work that you directed us to do at the last meeting regarding the in-state program. And so if we do have an opportunity to present that, we certainly will. But just kind of bear with us as we make sure that our bandwidth is located in the right places. Ben, I think I added another slide just now to the presentation that if you could go to, okay, maybe it didn't sync yet, but to the chairman's comments about accepting comments in the interim, we actually do have a general public comment form set out for our water augmentation projects. So if you go to our ltwaf.azwifa.gov website, click on the importation tab at the top. There's a QR code on that page that links you to a general public comment form. So to the chairman's point, if you do have thoughts or questions or concerns as we go forward, please feel free to populate them in that form. That's kind of where we have our general place to collect all of those comments and be able to respond or address them appropriately. So just wanted to point that out as well. And I think that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Moving to agenda item number 7, I already discussed this, that our next long-term water augmentation committee meeting is scheduled for April 9th at 9 a.m. And I'll repeat what I said earlier is that we will go through task orders 1 through 4 again to incorporate and discuss any feedback that we may have received on those, including obviously from committee members. And then also go through like we did today on task order 5 for the first time. And the intent of that meeting on the 9th is to make a recommendation to the board with respect to each of the 5 task orders and anything on task order 0. And then take that to them at the regularly scheduled board meeting on the 3rd Wednesday, April 15th at 1 p.m. I guess it's committee meetings at 1, the board meetings at 9.
That's correct.
Okay. If there are no questions on the next meetings, then we'll move on to agenda item number 8, which is adjournment. If there's nothing else, no hands raised, then this meeting is adjourned. It is now 10:07 a.m.
Thanks, Tip.
Somebody try to.